I just want to look like a wizard.
Mission accomplished.
or one of wizard.
Wizard.
Is it one of wizards who tried to engage to Rose West, or was that Slade?
No, Slade. It was. Who's the guitarist?
Super Yob. Dave Hill.
Dave Hill.
Dave Hill?
Well done.
Yeah.
It is Dave Hill. Yeah.
He tried to get engaged.
Rose West, yeah.
Pre-Fred.
No, while she's in prison.
You were joking.
Britain. An ancient kingdom with legends of violence, cruelty, and torment in its blood. Join your hosts, Ross, John, and James, as they bravely tread where few would dare. Witness their journey into the horrific history of British horror. They are the General Witchfinders.
Welcome, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, goblins and ghouls, to the second episode of the General Witchfinders podcast. I'm James in Bournemouth, on the south coast of England.
I'm John Pountney, and I'm still in the south Wales, which is in the south of Wales.
Do you want to do that again?
No, I like it.
Okay. I'm Ross in Dorchester in south of England, and today's episode we're going to cover The Curse of Frankenstein.
More than 100 years ago, in a mountain village in Switzerland, lived a man whose strange experiments with the dead have since become a legend. A legend that is still told with horror the world over.
We've only just started, just opened the door. Look, now's the time to go through that door and find what lies beyond it. But don't you see, Paul? We've discovered the source of life itself, and we've used it to restore a creature that was dead.
This is Frankenstein, who revolted against nature, who experimented with the devil and was forever cursed. His unwilling collaborator was Paul Krempe.
I can't prove you murdered, but I can stop you using his brain.
Why, he has no further use for it?
Don't be a fool! Be careful! You damn it!
Only two women ever entered this house of evil.
Elizabeth, come back!
Elizabeth, the lovely cousin who had promised to marry him, and Justine the maid, who kept passionate and secret rendezvous with her master.
Won't you understand you're in real danger? What Victor is doing is dangerous to everyone in the house. Now, you cannot possibly conceive what dreadful thing he's planning to do.
What are you trying to tell me, Paul? That Victor's wicked? Insane?
Wicked, insane, evil. Call Frankenstein what you will. A demon had made a man-made monster, and now the monster was the master.
Paul, what are you going to do? For your sake and to protect Elizabeth, I've so far kept silent. But now I shall go to the authorities and have them destroy that creature. And see that you pay for these atrocities. No!
19th century Switzerland. On the eve of his execution for the murder of his maid, Baron Victor von Frankenstein confesses his story to a visiting priest. As an orphan teenager, the Baron engages scientist Paul Krempe to tutor him, and they begin collaborating on scientific experiments. After successfully bringing back a dead puppy back to life, Victor suggests that they create a perfect human being from body parts. Paul assists Victor at first, but eventually withdraws, unable to tolerate the continued scavenging of human remains, particularly after Victor's fiancée/cousin comes to live with them. Peter Cushing, who was then best known for his roles in British television, had his first lead part in the movie with this film. Meanwhile, Christopher Lee's casting resulted largely from his height, which is 6'5", though Hammer had earlier considered the even taller 6'7" Bernard Bresslaw for the role, best known from his Carry On roles. The Curse of Frankenstein premiered in London on the 2nd of May 1957 and was a monstrous success, grossing more than 70 times its production costs during its original theatrical run.
Thank you very much.
So there we go. Nice.
So, we all watched the film.
You know, I don't know what... my feeling was, this was kind of... All of this could have been stopped if only everyone wasn't so well-mannered and so sexist. Like the amount of times it's like, I can't tell you. Just tell her. Just tell her and this all will stop. I can't possibly say that. Go to the authorities and just say he's killing people and he's using their bodies. End of problem.
Yeah, and also...
End of problem for all of you.
We'll get to it, but why didn't Paul just leave? You know, rather than just...
There are numerous times.
Yeah. So we start the film.
Yes.
With my favourite shot of the film was right at the very beginning when the priest was going along on the horse with an amazing bit of matte painting.
Painting.
Lovely.
Yeah, it was really nice.
The padre on his little donkey was walking into the painting of somewhere that looked nothing like Switzerland whatsoever.
Yeah, to try to give like some sense of like the grand scope of this film, which is actually going to be filmed in 2 rooms, and they go into a scene very much, I think, an inspiration for Silence of the Lambs as he walks past the various people inside their cells, shouting out to him. And none of them can smell his. Oh, sorry, we can't put that in.
Oh, come on.
Do not put that in.
I said to Beck, at that point, this is when they were making films to look beautiful. You know, every shot was set up to look, at this point in the film, I felt, to look cinematic. It wasn't. There wasn't any pretense of trying to make this look real or anything. It was just. I just loved the way he was in shadow. We had the shape of the sort of the vaulted cell he was in, and then we had the first of many throttlings in the film.
Throttle heavy.
Victor starts throttling the priest. I can't remember exactly why, but then I realised that the whole time that throttling was happening, just the guard was watching him through the hole in the door
the whole time.
Yeah. Lots of mixtures of accents going on at this point, and like you said, none of them are Swiss at all. There's a bit of Cockney, English upper class. But this is then when we transition back in time to an episode of Ain't Off Hot Mum.
Hold on a second, Russ. You're getting ahead of yourself here.
You're jumping way ahead there, Cleve.
First of all, I just have to point out, as usual, as often with sort of Hammer horror films and things such as that, there's like a preamble at the start, a setting of the scene. And what like it said at the start, this tale has been told with horror for centuries since. I'm like, it's never told with levity. Is it? Well, with the exception of Young Frankenstein, no one goes, tell you what, this is going to crack you up. This is going to crack you up, this story. It's always told with horror. And
maybe
also,
we're doing it tonight, though, fellas.
Well, maybe so. And also, second film in a row, the classic Gothic font.
Yes, very nice, yes.
And I was going to say, does 50s to 70s horror naturally suggest itself to a Gothic font?
I think all the time, yeah. I was going to stick a few factoids in.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, it's the first ever colour horror film.
Oh.
In the world.
Yeah, I thought it was the first colour Frankenstein, but I didn't realise it was the first colour horror.
So it's the first time you've seen red blood on the screen in a horror film, which I think is quite interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
My notes are, the music is a bit pedantic at the start. The actual opening theme of the film is very dreary.
It's not the same as Dracula AD 97.
It really isn't the same as that. But the tune of Frankenstein does scan over the name Frankenstein, but I can't remember the intonation of the words now. The production design, Ross, is by Bernard Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the early kind of mise-en-scène of the different sets, and particularly that set where he walks through and then he goes into the cell, that is all beautifully put together.
Yeah.
And it actually makes the film look a lot more expensive than it probably was, because you're right to say, I realised that as I was coming towards the end of the film, I think there's only 3 location shots in the whole film.
Yeah.
Which is pretty nuts, really.
I felt like the prison was brilliant.
Yeah,
there was only a small number of exterior shots when they went to the funeral and so on.
Well, that's that's a set with a painting.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And you got the lab, of course, but the set of the house I felt was quite boring. It felt very televisual, very small.
Yeah.
The opening of it, I I was thinking, oh, this is going to be good. When I saw that first map painting, when we saw the entrance through the prison, it was going well at that point.
I think it's a really good framing device to open the film with Peter Cushing straight away. Wham bam, you're straight into the storytelling aspect.
But that's pretty much what's in the book. It's with him telling the captain on the ship, isn't it?
Yes.
In the Antarctic or the Arctic, which is always good. But you always know that person's going to survive if they're telling you the story.
Well, does he survive?
I
got down here. Tommy Cooper is the jailer.
He wasn't a natural actor, was he?
No.
He wasn't, and this man's raving. I thought, how language has changed. Like going, touch the lasers, Fabio and Groove Rider.
Whenever I watch a film like this, I like to imagine the kind of extras and kind of whatever they call them these days, the background artists, in the 50s, leaving the studio, getting in like some kind of 1950s car and just driving home through the streets of London in the 1950s. And I like to imagine their life outside of the film.
Yeah, was it sort of take away the boring actual watching of the film?
I didn't find it boring, Ross, to be honest.
All right.
Oh dear, another one he doesn't like.
The thing that I've noted down here is that when he starts to recount his tale, I know he's supposed to be arrogant. And I know that's like the folly, but he starts talking about his own life. And I thought, who does this? He goes, as a young man, I always had a brilliant intellect. And immediately, as, I am a teacher, that's my job. I immediately thought, I'll be the judge of that, young man. Don't you just straight away, I've always been brilliant. Have you now? Really? Okay, sure. And then, as we're saying, I've written in capital letters, young Melvin Hayes Claxon. Because we should point out for people who aren't from the British Isles that Melvin Hayes was a stalwart of a much-loved early 1980s, late 1970s,
late 70s, early 80s,
the 80s sitcom called It Ain't Half Hot Mum. In which, we won't go into It Ain't Half Hot Mum now. We'll be here forever. But
we'll do it. That's enough of a horror to have its own episode.
Indeed, and alongside the legend that was Windsor Davis. Anyway, so that's how he's best known, and so to suddenly see him as a callow youth was it's a moment, isn't it?
I think it was another actor who was probably cast for his size. We need a short man at this point, because I didn't see much of a resemblance to Peter Cushing at all.
There's no resemblance at all. Well, I've recently, through watching Talking Pictures in the daytime, mainly last year, was also made aware that Melvin Hayes is in a lot of Cliff Richard and the Shadows films.
Summer Holiday.
Yeah, as a stand-in for the Shadows, because the Shadows in the first few films couldn't act. So they brought in Richard O'Sullivan, one of the Shadows, and Melvin Hayes as a Shadow. And he's got bleach blonde hair in all the films. And he's in like 3 films as one of the Shadows, but he isn't one of the Shadows.
When you're talking about our listeners across the seas, we do have a listener in the United Republic of Tanzania, apparently.
Do we really?
Yeah.
So hats off to you, sir or madam, whoever you may be.
And did we have two listeners in Benelux, did you say, Cleves?
Yes. Belgium,
one person that's listened twice?
Yes, there we go. Thank you.
And what do we say to our Belgian friends? Bonjour.
Sorry we left.
Then we get this amazing thing, like we find out that his father, long since dead, his mother has passed away, thus making him the young Baron, and then the man who ends up becoming kind of like his contemporary, but he first turns up as his teacher. And then once again, for me, in the profession, I thought, oof, there's a few sequences here in which I would have thought they would trouble a CRB check. That's all I'm saying. Because we're told in the montage, there's a part when we see him teach biology and he's teaching him electronics. And then at one point, he bursts in to see him while he's shaving. I thought, oh.
There was a point when they look at a model of the lab, which I think was probably what they used for the art department to work out what it was actually going to look like.
Yeah. And then he then says, we probed into the unknown together. I thought, did you now? And then, as they then show you sort of like the passing of years, and what was great is that to show you the aging of Paul, he just got a beard, and that's pretty accurate. All 3 of us here, when we knew each other in our 20s, did not have beards. Now we all do.
Yeah,
correct.
One of us looks more like a wizard than the other.
But then But then with that, kind of like the fade was that the jump went from Melvin Hayes into Peter Cushing. And I've written down that homework must have been bloody hard to age him that much.
Well, there was one scene where Peter Cushing had a kind of big wig on that kind of bridged him. It was like it bridged between Pertwee and Baker in like a regeneration sequence. But then Peter Cushing just becomes Peter Cushing. So I looked up at this point the fact that Peter Cushing was actually 9 years older than the guy that's playing Paul, who is supposedly the older
mentor.
So I think Cushing was born in like 1913 and Robert Urquhart was born in like 1922 or something like that. It's rubbish, really, that part of it, isn't it? They do try and grey Paul's hair a bit as well, I noticed, but it's a bit kind of, it just looks like grey paint.
And then, like you, Ross, I had highlighted the fact that he then says, we then started to sort of push the boundaries. And as you said, he then says, oh, look, he's got like a little model of the lab replete with beakers and conical flasks. I thought, no, they're not strictly necessary. But it looked nice, didn't it? It looked lovely.
Yeah.
I thought that he's definitely getting a level 9 or an A star in old money for his design and technology GCSE. Well done.
CDT.
You made a little house, didn't you, out of a cardboard box of all windows of all the things you liked?
That was for art.
That's nice.
That was art for pop art. And a bunch of ruffians then smashed it up.
Yeah, they fired paper clips through the windows, didn't they?
Yes.
Oh, dear.
Thanks for that, Ross.
But it reminds me of when I came back to school after the summer holidays and everyone was carrying Roman temples made out of toilet rolls and things like that. And I was like, shit. I think I might have to do something.
This film reminded you of that?
Well, this conversation reminded me of that.
All right, okay. That's moving away from teenage and childhood trauma.
I'm sorry.
We then see that they're doing like the first experiment in reanimating the dead, right? And I have to say, in terms of the sound and the sound design, I've written down, this sounds like a lot of experimental gigs and art shows that I've been to.
James, were you there when John was a brain in a vat for a philosophy lecture?
No, you've told me about it.
We got a cauliflower, put it into a vat with some dry ice and wires.
There was no dry ice in this.
In my memory, there was dry ice, and then John sat underneath the desk.
I was under a desk talking through like a ring modulator to make my voice go like
Dr. Clive, and then he did a whole read out his presentation about why we know we're not brains in vat.
Because I knew what I'd written was absolute rubbish. I thought the only way I could pull the wool over anyone's eyes is to turn this into a performance. Yeah, and I don't think I succeeded, to be honest.
Well, do you know what, though, John? That's sort of like the world of philosophy for me right there. A lot of the time, it's a lot of people talking a lot of rubbish, and they just turn it into a bit of a performance.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's a man hiding under a table.
Yep.
There you go, perfect. And Gilbert Harman, who was the philosopher who came up with the brain in a vat thought experiment, fact fans, by the way, I'm sure he would have loved it.
Yeah.
He was there, James.
So it's a success, and the puppy comes back to life.
Yeah.
And then this is the bit. This is all kind of like the madness. There's along with the whole, as I said at the outset, the whole kind of British manners, the 1950s manners, kind of making the horror continue. The other thing was, part of me was just like, that's not how science works, everybody. Look, it's like, were they just trying to bowl things past the audience or what? Because the best of it is so let's just go over the monumental thing these two have managed to do. They have managed to reanimate dead tissue, right? They've conquered death. Right at this point, because it's Switzerland, you're marching down to the Nobel Committee, going, I'll have all the prizes. Thank you very much. But then he goes, oh, this is marvellous. And he goes, no, it's not enough. It's not enough to defeat death.
No, I think...
What do you want, man?
Yeah, I think they needed to have some kind of reason why he wanted to go that far. I seem to remember there was a Kenneth Branagh version of this. Didn't his mother die and in childbirth or something like that? And that that sort of led him to want to be able to bring the dead back.
That's a very modern take on storytelling, Ross.
I'm sorry. But I watched...
You don't have to have a reason to reanimate a dead puppy.
It's just doing it for the fun.
For the love of the puppy.
For the bounce. I did watch this with my 9-year-old daughter, who's
great parenting.
A big
top drawer. Well done, sir.
Well, she's
it's
a big
15.
Yeah, that's a 12. She's a big.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not scary, is it?
But she doesn't like blood at all. So
Oh God.
we'll come to that later on. One of the scariest things she's ever seen was someone punching Kevin Costner in the face and give him a nosebleed. It just freaked her out. She's a big dog lover. And I was just hoping that she didn't work out that they probably did kill a dog in order to film the bit where...
No, they didn't.
But there was the dog was dead in the vat.
It wasn't. It's a stuffed toy.
No, it
My notes on this scene are the main thing, which I thought was hilarious, that the fantastic "It's Alive" Colin Clive 1931 Frankenstein line is used in this scene, and it's about a puppy that just wakes up and kind of shakes itself, which is a real kind of underselling of the of that line. And my other kind of thing was that what interested me with this film to start off with, and it's kind of interesting, but it doesn't really go anywhere, is that there's no hero in the film. That the main character is the baddie, and Paul, although altruistic, is just a bit of a wet lettuce.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just keeps saying, don't do this, but doesn't do anything about it.
Don't do this. I'm going to stay living in your house. I'm going to chat up your wife. And in the end, I'm going to leave with your wife as you were decapitated. So it's a bit, morally, it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Where it's not like...
It's a very modern reading of the film there, John.
Yes.
They then decide, right, okay, what we're going to do, as we said in the synopsis at the start, is we're now going to build the perfect human. And once again, this is now hang on a minute, brainiacs. You're brilliant enough to be able to reanimate life, but you're not brilliant enough to realise that skill does not reside in the hands. So they get the body of a guy who we told was a highwayman who'd been terrorising Bern.
Oh, I like that bit. That was a good bit.
Yeah. Right.
They cut him off the gibbet.
Yes. And then Victor Frankenstein says, "Oh, look at his hands. He couldn't have been anything else but a criminal." It's like, for those of us with larger hands, you're like, "Oh, all right. Don't judge me."
But wasn't that sort of scientific sort of thinking at the time of this was being made?
Yeah, like fruit. No. Wait, look, because this is what I was going to say, Ross. I had a look. This film came out in 1957. They discovered DNA in 1953.
Yeah, but this is...
Come on, man.
I thought that had a lot to do with eugenics at that point, and I thought that was quite
like Lombroso
weird,
and all of that sort
and
of
it's
stuff.
like someone with big hands can't, sculpt and whatever. Have you got big hands, Cleves?
Yeah, James is bigger than mine.
What I also liked about the gibbet scene where they cut the corpse off the gibbet is the fact that someone has come along and handily put a really massive spotlight on the gibbet so they can see what they're doing.
Yeah, you would.
And they've put so they're in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, and it's got a massive searchlight on it that looks like it's looking for zeppelins.
But Peter Cushing really climbed up there, though. I thought that was pretty daredevil. I like that.
It does look really cool, but the lighting is just very silly for that, because it's obviously not realistic. I mean, we're talking about a film with a reanimated puppy, so it's obviously not going to be strictly
I've got a quote here,
scientific,
which I think came from this part of the film. "Let him rest in peace while he can."
While he can. I wrote that down as well.
Yeah.
And I wrote down hands of an artist, the perfect physique, and the mature brain of a genius.
I think it's like the three of us, isn't it? If you put them all together.
Yeah. Who's who, though? Cleaver's the physique.
James is a genius, and you got the hands.
James is the brain, and I've got hands.
We then have that kind of sequence of basically him harvesting body parts to make his perfect human, inverted commas. Although intersped with that, we then get the arrival of his cousin, who, hold up a minute, we then find out he's going to get married to. And what I've just put here is, did they learn nothing from the Spanish royal family?
my daughter asked me at that point, "Can you do that?" And I was like,
"No,
I don't know.
No, don't do that."
Jerry Lee Lewis, the killer, did it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. It's a good point, well made. But yeah, but then we also find out
chased across 3 states.
That he was that Victor von Frankenstein is also basically given it to his maid. You know, who knew he was such a Lothario.
It was very interesting.
Poor Justine.
Yeah, he's very the way he acted with her was completely different from the rest of the. He was like a completely different character there. That was the only time he sort of came across as someone who was actually quite evil, whereas the other
alive. What I've written down is that part basically is the relationship between Rene in a lower low and all of his female staff.
Mimi LeBlanc.
Yeah, because she sounds exactly like, oh, Rene. Oh, Victor. Don't call me Victor. Call me Hair Baron.
Hairy Baron.
Hairy Baron.
You stupid woman. Oh, if only Gordon Kay was in this.
So the Baron continues his kind of
reign of terror.
Of just kind of scouring Europe for the very best in body parts.
The charnel house.
Yes.
Yeah,
and then
the municipal charnel house, which I really liked the sign on the wall.
That's right. Not the national charnel house, just the local one. And then when he gets kind of like the head, the replacement head that he's going to put in the massive fish tank that the body is being stored in, he then says, "Oh look, you know, he looks pretty stupid, doesn't he? But you know, we don't get to see this." But he says, "Don't worry, the features will assume wisdom and understanding." When you put a genius brain in there, and once again, I've written that's not how that works.
No, and also
you don't look clever. You know, oh look, you look gorgeous now because you're clever.
But we did see, but when he hacked off the other head because it'd been the birds had got it, we see them put it into the big vat of
acid,
which a lot of people
massively signposted that you've got to take notice of the fact that something will go in there and it'll be gone within 30 seconds or whatever.
As Breaking Bad used to great effect many years later.
Inspired by Curse of Frankenstein.
Inevitably, I should think so. The final piece, the zenith of all this, is that he gets, like, who we're told is like the most intelligent man in Europe to come and hang out and drink sherry.
The only person to bother putting on some kind of accent. Yeah.
I missed. Did they say why was he a science genius? Was he what was his field of expertise? Did they say?
I fast forwarded that scene because it's such a boring scene. I've seen this film quite often, and it's just this old man droning on, and his wife is being coquettish.
I was interested in the fact because he had quite a few teeth missing, which was quite grossing me out.
But allegedly, but then allegedly we've just been told that a genius brain will make someone have beautiful features.
Yeah, he had very strange sort of coned back afro hair.
His hair was mental.
Then Paul comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And says, "You got to stop this. This is madness, man." And so yet again, if he just goes into the town and goes, "My friend has been stealing body parts. Please just go and you'll find it. It's in his laboratory. Go and look now."
But it's a cash cow, though, isn't it? You know, you don't want to.
For this part, I've written lovers tiff, ? Victor and Paul, and Urquhart is awful, and I think he is absolutely awful in this film, isn't he? His performance is fag paper thin. It's one-dimensional. There's a line he has to deliver, which is, "She would be incapable of conceiving of such a shock," which is just the most. Mangled, stupid rubbish. And I don't know if it's someone in 1957 trying to write as if, you know, for how he thinks Victorians would have thought, or if he thought that Jimmy Sangster is the writer, or maybe he thought that women still felt like that in 1957. I don't really know, but Urquhart is just the pits, really. And he was never in another Hammer film, and I think I read somewhere online that he walked out of the premiere because he was so disgusted by the film. I think the reason why he walked out, he was so ashamed of his own performance at that point.
Hot take.
The hottest of takes from the 1950s.
Cleve, you're down with all the modern lingo tonight.
He is. He's got young children, hasn't he? So
I know.
He knows what's going on.
The Baron then shiftily take the old guy up to bed.
His genius plan is Look at this picture at the top of my stairs.
This is barely one story up.
This is where my art historical a BDI comes in. The painting is by Rembrandt, and it's the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp, and it's from 1632. Ooh. So it's an actual real painting. It's a very famous painting.
It looks better if you stand further back, though.
Well, I was about to say, and then my notes are the wisest man in Europe, but also its most gullible fool. As he falls for, if you just stand back a bit, you'll be able to see the picture better. What?
Well, I can't stand very far back because this is the smallest set.
Look out, man! At which point he then turns round. He turns 180 degrees for some inexplicable reason, and Peter Cushing pushes him over the stairs.
But it was a pretty good fall. Looked pretty nasty. Obviously, a completely different man hit the ground.
Indeed, I put that he de-aged 70 years during the fall.
When he hit the ground, though, his head he landed face first. Yeah. And this is where my wife said, "Oh, he did full scorpion at that point because his legs backed up over his back." But apparently the stuntman missed the mat on the floor and
added bit,
and hit the real floor and almost killed himself at that point.
Yeah, I've written the fall is genuinely sickening.
Yeah. what the band?
Yeah. Victor von Frankenstein working in a lab with a Tesco agreement. No, that's my Marky Smith.
Yeah, he falls and it looks like he's genuinely broken his spine.
He probably did.
We've missed out a part where there's a nice close-up of Peter Cushing looking through a magnifying glass at a dead eye.
Yeah,
which is then parodied. It's parodied in Top Secret, which I sent you the clip of the other day, didn't I? When they do the whole backwards scene. I think your response was, "What the fuck is this?"
I did wonder what you'd sent me. But then the reverse of the shot is a close-up of his eye looking through the magnifying glass, which I thought was very clever and a nice directorial touch from a director, Terence Fisher.
But the eyeballs were probably one of the scariest parts for my daughter, just seeing actual eyeball.
Really? To see a real eyeball? I think it was probably
so I said to her, "Don't worry, it's only probably a pig's eye or something." Yeah. I said there was a boy at our school when we dissected them, turned one inside out on his finger and was licking it.
I remember in my school a boy called Robert Hartwell fainted, walked out of the class and fainted in the corridor when I think the teacher pulled a fish's eye out and started dissecting it. Do they still do things like that in school?
I'm not sure. I think there may be possibly frogs still get dissected, but I'm not
really.
Yeah, but I'm not sure on eyes.
Our teacher inflated a pig's lung until it burst in one lesson.
Lovely.
Of course, Ross did go to school in Tudor London.
Right. Okay. So back to the plot. I too have written down that once again, as John was highlighting, he says to the Baron's cousin, who is now his wife, "You can't conceive of what he's doing, let alone try," which I thought was the most horrendously sexist. And then I've just written down, he's reanimating the dead and grave robbing. And I thought, that's not that difficult, is it? There you go, that's what he's up to. He's reanimating the dead and then he's stealing dead body parts. There you go.
But I think that the shock would have
made her faint.
Shocked her, James. That's the thing. Yeah.
Cold compress all round. Yeah, and all of that business. Yeah.
A bit of black humour where the friend of the dead doctor thanks Herr Baron for putting the body of the dead doctor in his own family vault, which is a nice touch, and made me laugh. And then nighttime falls. Baron Frankenstein is in the tomb, opens up the coffin and extracts the brain of the departed doctor. Paul comes in like a cricket bat on legs with all the acting presence of a bush. Comes in, they have a very badly kind of conceived fight.
Lo-fi tussle,
and then the brain. Yeah, they look a bit like they're pushing each other outside a pub at like 11:30 on a Friday night. And then basically the brain gets smashed against the wall and gets lots of glass. Which
reminded me of one Christmas where Beck was trying to we cooked a large gammon for Christmas meal that day, and
a Brexit voting
yes, exactly.
person.
And it was all lots of running around in the kitchen, and I reached to a cupboard above where she was just preparing the centerpiece of the meal, and pulled a glass out and was smashed on top of the dinner, and she just so the Christmas dinner for like 8-10 people was just covered in broken glass.
Beautiful.
So she just said, "Just leave."
Scenes from a marriage.
The glass was picked out and served up without telling anyone that it had broken glass on it at some point, and everything was fine.
But no one was hospitalised that time.
When she said just leave, did you actually have to leave the house?
The country?
Just the room. Just the room, okay. While she picked broken glass out of the dinner. This is the point when also, speaking of my wife, she realised we weren't watching Dracula.
Yes. Well done, mate.
She said I wasn't really paying attention.
That's excellent. But I should point out that I had noted, in that vein, that it took 18 minutes for anything horrific to happen at all, which is quite a long time in a horror film.
I've written that at the 40-minute mark, there's been no real horror.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just kind of mise en scene. The great line that I've written down is that the Baron says, "Don't worry, I can repair the brain," and you're like, "No, you can't, mate.
Just get another one.
You can barely do anything, mate. You think that skill resides in hands. You are now operating on the most complex thing humans have yet encountered in the universe."
If we see the state of Christopher Lee's face later on, yeah, we know he's not a particularly good surgeon.
He's not a genius.
No.
And then also the fact that he's been dead. The genius has been dead for hours. Even if you reanimated the brain, it would be less than mush. But anyway, that's besides.
No oxygen.
Exactly.
Well, I did question when he'd gone to Leipzig to get the hands of a dead sculptist or whatever, and had carried them all the way back from Leipzig in his hand luggage. And then it's like, presents them to Paul, like, look at these hands. And then it's like, it's taken you 2 days. Like, you couldn't keep a chicken breast in a handbag for 2 days and then cook it, let alone reanimate it. So our next scene is the creation scene, really, which is kind of underplayed to start off with. There's an approaching thunderstorm which you see nothing of at all, because so far it's been totally set bound. So then the body as in the created, perfect man that he's created. The creature, wrapped up in bandages, is in this big kind of bathtub, glass-sided bathtub. Yeah, I said that
this is the invention of the hot tub.
Yeah, well, that's basically what I've written. So it looks like there's a bit where he's turning these two big taps, and it looks like he's turning on a jacuzzi, because all these bubbles start coming out. And I expected him to tip in a bit of Radox as well while he's at it.
Yickety yak.
I've created life, but also Legionnaire's disease.
So then there's a sequence where he realises that he can't work the machinery that he's developed with Paul single-handedly.
Oh, I didn't get that.
No, there's a scene where this happens. So he goes to Paul and he says, "You must help me, Paul, and you're going to do it. You will help me." But then at this point, Paul's wearing a very fetching red silk dressing gown. And I did question it at this point whether the red was symbolic of stop. Paul meaning stop. Stop perverting nature. And there's a bit where...
I must have tuned out all this bit. I can't remember any of this.
Peter Cushing says, a bit like... John Pertwee, when he calls the Cybermen the Cybermen, he goes, "I can't do it myself." Who says myself?
I'm going to start doing it now.
I can't do it myself, which is a very kind of English
Intonation.
posh old-fashioned way of saying myself, isn't it?
Myself. Yeah.
And then this is the point where Victor turns nasty, and machine that he's invented, which up to this point, watching this today, I've never really thought about this before. It's this kind of two wheels spinning together that's kind of making static electricity, and then it's going into a battery, which has got these kind of red pulsing lights. I have never thought about that in my life before, that's what was actually happening at that point.
If he held on to it, all his hair would have stood up on end.
But none of that actually seems to work, because then there's lightning strikes it, and that's what sets off the creature. So it's a bit of a weird... Does this mean that Victor thinks all along that he's been successful in creating this monster, when actually it's just an accident of the lightning that has actually brought it to life?
Serendipity, yeah.
Maybe he just needed the extra power. That was only enough to get a puppy previously.
1.21 gigawatts.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just thoughtless bad writing.
Also highly possible.
I've never read Frankenstein. Was the lightning in Frankenstein? Or
I've never read the book.
Dovetailing beautifully into what we're going to talk about in a bit is that obviously this film was a 1950s modern, in inverted commas, updating of the classic Universal horror, the James Whale Frankenstein, as it were. But of course, the whole deal is that in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, he's really into the creature, whose proper name, of course, is Adam Frankenstein. Everyone, Frankenstein. Yes, if you didn't know that. In the book, it says, he says, I will take the name of the first man, for I am like the first, so I am Adam. And I will also take the name of my creator. So he's Adam Frankenstein. But anyway, they are fact fans. But within all of that, as you might be able to tell, he's clever. He's really intelligent. So this whole notion of, even though it's a damaged genius brain, the whole notion that the poor genius is just like going... And like it's suddenly like this, and all he wants to do is kill. Now you can make a really sophisticated reading of it and just say, "Oh well, it's human, the essence of human consciousness stripped back down to the id," or something like that. But at the same time, it's just like, why is it that when being given life, he just immediately wants to kill all the time? It seems so weird.
I've got a theory on this, James, and I think that I thought about that, and I think it's because the first face that he sees. The creature now, as he's brought back to life, is the last face that he saw as he was being pushed off the balcony by Peter Cushing.
That is a good point.
And obviously, he's going for him.
So there was a good shot though when they open the door. And the creature stand there, and there's a little bit of a sped up zoom up into him.
Yep.
It's a sped up dolly shot, because I don't think they even had zoom lenses at that point. So the camera is on a track on the floor, and they've pushed the camera physically towards him. But then that's sped up as well, which I think works really, really well. And then Christopher Lee does this kind of weird gesture across his face, pulls the bandages off, and the makeup is revealed as being horrific.
Well, and in terms of his look, I've just put down Paul McCartney after a heavy session on the Jaeger bombs.
Beck said he looked like Dudley Moore.
The hair does preempt the mop tops, because once again, this is not, this is the 50s. And he then
the Beatles wigs.
And I should point out, as I was watching it, this is the main thing that I thought about, is that I was lucky enough that I went to see in the theatre Danny Boyle's version of Frankenstein that had Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller, and they took it in turns to be either Frankenstein or the creature. They swapped, so they played both roles, thus highlighting the whole kind of dualism and he's a mirror of what he created and all the rest of it. Now, at the start, they showed you this whole thing. It was amazing. The night I went, it was Johnny Lee Miller as Frankenstein, Cumberbatch as the monster, which was great, and I think probably the best combination to see. But they showed you at the start that, like, they said, in order to get his like the facial intonations and his movement, Benedict Cumberbatch spent weeks in a stroke recovery ward. Looking at people, looking at people's faces and their actions and things such as that, based on the notion that you would have to relearn how to walk and move. And they really kind of highlight this from the moment he's, like when he first comes back to life, his movements really dreadful and kind of monstrous. But then as the play goes on and his muscles begin to work again, he moves around better with more alacrity. But then watching this, I was just like, what did Christopher Lee do? Christopher Lee just basically looked at a load of people getting really drunk. That's all he does. He just goes, and just sort of stumbles around drunkenly.
He looks, in that first scene, he looks like someone's basically tied broomsticks to his arms and legs. So he just can't bend his arms and legs, which I suppose is a bit... Yeah, I bet it was nice for people recovering from strokes to have Benedict Cumberbatch come and stare at them.
I'm going to be playing a monster. I need to look at you.
Victor Frankenstein. 50 minutes in, and we first see the monster. Tries to strangle him straight away. As we've discussed, I think it's because the first face he sees is the face of the man that's tried to...
That is a good point.
Has murdered him.
I take that on board.
And then we have This Is Man.
Some great throttled acting by...
we have some more throttling.
Who won between who did the best throttled face?
I think it was Peter Cushing, actually.
So we did do a poll on our Twitter, which is General Which One, if you want to follow us on Twitter. We compared stills from Peter Cushing being throttled by the creature and John Pertwee being throttled by the nesting consciousness, was it, John?
It was, yes, correctly.
From Spearhead from Space?
Spearhead from Space, episode 4.
Oh, okay.
But the only Doctor Who story ever to be shot totally on 16mm film.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good knowledge, that, mate. That's good knowledge.
Anyway, sorry, John. I interrupted.
What, did you?
Yes.
Oh, so basically, but at this point now, Victor Frankenstein tries to start gaslighting Paul and basically says at every point, this is all your fault, Paul.
Your fault. If you hadn't taught me so well, that's what thanks you get.
I've done it. I've done everything up to now wrong, but because you smashed the jar against the wall, this is why his brain's a mess now, you idiot, Paul. So Paul does some more terrible acting.
The creature gets away, doesn't it?
We get the classic Frankenstein out in the wild.
Yes, yeah.
And then this is when my daughter got very upset because she was aware that there was going to be a blind man, and she doesn't like the idea of disabled people being hurt in any way. So she said, "He's going to hurt the blind man. Hurt the blind man." I said, I don't know if there's a blind man in this one. And then the crankies came out of a bush. And the older cranky was blind. I was like, oh, maybe he's going to get hurt.
And the kid was ginger.
So it's the classic horror film trope of you cut from this kind of frenetic action to this kind of pastoral scene of
Switzerland.
And then the grandfather sits down, starts talking in a Welsh accent in the middle of Switzerland.
Of course.
And then obviously you have this kind of disastrous sequence where the monster comes and kills them both, which is riffing on the famous Boris Karloff scene where he throws... He sees daisies. Yeah, he sees daisies floating in the lake and he thinks the little girl will float, so he throws her in and she doesn't. She drowns.
So it seems like they mashed those two bits together but removed any of the good bits, like the conversation with the blind man not realising it was a monster. That was lost. The whole idea of the innocence of the child and the innocence of the monster, that was lost. All we saw was Christopher Lee kill the blind guy.
Do you see him kill the boy? The little boy?
They insinuate it.
Yeah, you see his satchel. Yeah, you see his mushroom satchel left on the floor.
You see his ginger Russ Abbott wig on the leaves. He comes out and he's like, why is he in a ginger wig with a stupid hat perched on top of that? It's ridiculous.
Apparently they painted the leaves as well to make them
look more Swiss.
Yeah, make it look more autumnal.
There was a cuckoo clock there. I did note down at that point, it's only the second bit of location shooting since they cut the man off the gibbet, which it doesn't feel, to me anyway, as claustrophobic as that.
It felt very televisual to me because it felt very studio bound.
Yeah, interesting.
Compare it to like the Dracula film we watched on our last episode.
Yes,
that felt so much more. Even though it's 1970s shitty London, it felt more cinematic because it just
a lot more, a lot more cinematic, yeah.
But then Paul and Victor turn up with their rifles or shotguns.
And Paul kind of drops in with a shot, doesn't he? Like it's that was less dramatic than I thought it was going to be. He then stands in a very kind of action pose with his hand on his hip. I go, now, what are you going to do about this, Victor? I was like, he looks quite pleased with himself. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a little teapot.
But I did read that the scream of pain was real from Christopher Lee because the squib went off in his eye.
I quite like that scene because there's quite a nice shot where you see the leaves kind of lift and blow up as he stood there, and he's quite distant from the camera, and then they shoot him.
Yeah, but it did act, to me, it looked like when you come across a non-playing character in a computer game, and they're just sort of like standing, waiting for you to get near, so that then they would then go into whatever what they're programmed to do. Yeah, because he was just sort of not doing anything. It was
it was weird that he was kind of just stood there. It's quite spooky. It's quite chilling eerie, that scene. Just chilling out in Black Park again, as usual. But then, obviously, he's shot. I think they bury him there, because that's not suspicious at all.
Yeah, they suddenly got spades.
Yeah, they dig a massive grave in just in the middle of nowhere and bury a body. But then obviously later on we find that Victor has gone, dug him up himself, got him back to the castle or whatever it is himself, then goes into his laboratory kind of lock-up room himself and finds that the monster is hung from a hook on the ceiling. How has he got up there? Who's hung him up there, and how is he going to get him down again?
There's no Igor in this film, and there needs to be an Igor in this film.
That's Igor's job, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's Igor's job.
Daniel Radcliffe plays Igor in a Frankenstein film, which is on.
Oh, that's dreadful!
That's really
absolutely atrocious.
Modern horror films are really very unwatchable and unlikable, aren't they? They're just. Like that kind of horror film where it's 90% CGI and it's like a steampunk London and it's just a load of shit.
I think one of the issues I got with this Frankenstein film is that we're at a point now where this story is being retold so many times.
Yeah.
I think we are so used to like people having a different take on it because they have to put a different spin on it now in order for it to be interesting. Jumping ahead to my conclusion on this, it felt to me very much Frankenstein by the numbers because, like I said, it was probably the second time there was a popular film of it.
Definitely.
There was no surprises for me in it, apart from things which I thought, oh, well, I've seen that done better in the Karloff one, you know? I think for me the only unique part of it was the makeup, and I was joking earlier when I said it looked awful. We watch a program called Face Off. It's like Bake Off for special effects makeup. And one of the things they're always talking about is the edges of any kind of a prosthetic you put on. And there's bits of that where it was just peeling off, and it was like, didn't look good. However, I did like the look of it, and I was thinking, that's I wouldn't mind dressing up as that at Halloween sometime. You know, I think I could pull it off. You're never going to get the iconic Universal Frankenstein. However, when you think
they weren't allowed to, were they?
But when you think of it, the Christopher Lee version is probably closer to what something like that would probably look like. Something disgusting, you know, putrefied mess, rather than
very dead mottled flesh, really.
Yeah.
And the bit at the end when you've seen that he's had brain surgery and all of the top of his hair's been shaved off and there's a big scar on his head, that does look really horrific. And I think in 1957, you know, only 12 years after the end of the war, the first colour horror film of all time, you know, I think it would have really put the shits up people.
Yeah. Well, so where were we in the story? So
we're building to the climax. Is he then also sort of sacrifices his his bit on the side, the maid.
I know.
Just because she threatens to do the obvious thing that someone should have done from the start, which is go into the town and just go, hey.
Unless he marries her, because she intimates that
pregnant.
She's pregnant, and and he promised that he'd marry her, and he said, he just laughs at her. I think that's, for me, that's when he comes across the nastiest.
Men.
Yeah. Well, that's like you said earlier. That's when he comes across as most evil and kind of shrewd and manipulating, and Cushing as well. I think that's when the performance is the most interesting, because it's not the kind of usual Cushing performance that you expect, where he's just quite gentlemanly all the way through.
But it did feel very again like a theatre set that she seemed to be living under the stairs. And like in the cupboard.
I did like that part, that you didn't see anything about that other than just a doorway, did you? That she came out of.
But then he tricks her to go into the lab and locks her in there with the creature.
Presumably she's put in the deep fat fryer.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd think so, yeah.
Yeah. But then there's an amusing, and this is quite a famous, amusing kind of line then, where we've just seen the horrific murder, and the Baron and his wife are sat at the breakfast table, and he says, "Pass the marmalade, darling," or something like that, which is obviously meant to puncture the horror of what we've just seen, which it doesn't really do to modern audiences, but I think it was quite a popular kind of laugh in 1957.
Well, just to break the tension, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And then we find straight away that they're to be married only a week after he's murdered his servant. And he's hoping that Paul will come to the wedding, because there's something I'd like him to see.
Yeah.
Then we have a very misplaced comic bit with a guy pretending to do toasts and drinking punch out of the bowl.
That's awful. Totally pointless.
Yeah. And absolutely no point to that scene being in the film at all.
No. So it's the pre-wedding night, isn't it? And it's a party. They're toasting supposedly he's meant to be doing the toast, but then we're told that the wedding is going to be tomorrow. It's just rubbish, that part.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of things were cut by the censor in the 50s. He throws the head into the acid. I think that you see the whole head go in and dissolve in the original print.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think this scene is much more horrific, and it should have been this that's cut, because I just think it's dreadful.
I can't remember how we get from this to the climax on the roof now.
It's a very jumbled narrative now, isn't it? Where
the wedding happens, Paul turns up.
The wedding doesn't happen. I don't think the wedding... Does the wedding happen?
He does, because he goes, "Right, my dear, now I must get back to work." And she goes, "On our wedding night?" And he goes, "Now come along, my dear. We're not two starstruck young lovers."
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Even though he's supposed to be about 20, isn't he? It's ridiculous. And so he just basically fobs her off. She's clearly, like his beard, even though it's his cousin. So he's like, "Yeah, I'm off. I've got to get back to
he's
work."
25,
and she goes, "Can I come
14.
into the lab?" And he's like, "No, don't be silly. A woman in a laboratory."
So I think then, does Paul come back at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
After the party, Paul comes back, and then the gaslighting of Paul continues, where, again, it's stressed how it's all Paul's fault, even though it isn't. And then I think there's another bit of a scuffle, maybe. Oh, no, I tell you what happens. They go in and see the monster, and he's been having a doze behind the, in the stable or whatever it is. The monster gets up, he walks forward, he sits down, and Paul is like, "This is your perfect physical being? Your ex blah, blah, blah." And obviously,
and we find that he's been training him like a dog. Like he's going to enter him for crafts.
Walkies!
Sit. Walkies! Roll over!
This is I was thinking, where does he crap? Where does and does the creature know how to take his trousers down, do it, and bring it back up, or does Victor have to go and do it for him?
Surely Ross is the only man in the world who's ever articulated that thought.
But did the censors cut the scene where Peter Cushing's wiping Christopher Lee's bum with a bit of straw?
So they have a brawl. They run outside, and they run into a garden that looks like the garden at the start of From Russia with Love, when Rosa Klebb is teaching Robert Shaw to be punched in the stomach.
The stomach!
And then all the lights flash on and there's a big house behind them. So it looks like basically exactly the same garden. In the meantime, Elizabeth goes in the lab. And I think that part works quite well, and they don't make enough of it because she looks really incongruous in the lab because she's got this massive Victorian dress on, this big lamp, and it's a really lovely shot. But they then make nothing of that. Then she walks through, blah blah blah, and then I think at this point the monster has escaped.
Well, the monster's peeping through the window, and
That's
the
right.
bit of glass.
So he's pulled his chain off,
like Sloth out of the Goonies.
He's pulled his chain. That's how he goes to the toilet, obviously. And then she looks up past the massive vat of acid. She doesn't seem to question that. Like you say, sees the face peeping in at the skylight. He taps a bit of glass down. She goes, "Who's there?" And then goes to look and see who's there.
Scaramantia.
If that happened to me in a laboratory, I would go in the opposite direction.
It's there. It's Paul McCartney trying to recover from the critical mauling of Magical Mystery Tour.
John Lennon, it's a drag.
Grace.
There's really good suspense music in this part, I thought, and then it all happens really fast. And they're like, "Oh, he's on the roof," and they shoot at him, or they do something, or Paul runs off.
They burst in. He fires. The Baron fires to try and kill. To kill the monster.
That's right.
And hits her. Hits
Shoots his own wife.
Wife. And she drops down, and then it goes out onto the roof. And then I wrote down least climactic finale ever. He just goes, "Leave me alone, and then sort of throws a paraffin torch onto him, and he gets set on fire, and he goes, fire.
Then falls from the roof into the acid
falls through the
bath.
skylight into the acid bath. I was like,
and disappears.
Yes,
so then,
we're told.
At that point, I was like, this is the end. I remember this to be the end. But then it isn't the end because there's like another 5 minutes where we revisit the Baron in his cell, and telling the priest, that's the story. Then Paul comes in and it all becomes a bit weird and confused because, and this point I've never realised before, because the monster has now disappeared. Does everyone think that... What does everyone think?
So he's been accused for the murder of the maid. So he's tried to say, "I didn't kill the maid. It was the monster.
My monster did.
But my monster did it." So, but Paul has to tell them that's true. But Paul just said he's a raving lunatic and he killed.
Yeah.
And
what I thought was
morality.
The last thing I put was I felt that the last 3 minutes almost redeemed it because I thought that's actually a really interesting take because obviously he doesn't want to say yes it's true because he hates him and he wants to see him die. But I thought what if the whole point is he's nuts. He's gone absolutely mad and he never did that. He did none of this kind of American Psycho-esque. He has gone mad and killed these people. Actually. And at the end, his former mentor and friend is like, "No, you didn't do this. You didn't. None of this happened."
That'd be a good film.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See, and I thought, whoa, that last piece was actually pretty good, and it kind of redeemed it for me a little.
So that kind of fits with what I said earlier, but I don't think it's what they meant. There's no hero in the film, and Paul is just a wet lettuce. But at the end, you see him traipsing off with his new 25-year-old bride.
Well done.
Yeah,
and
as we
I'm
hear the
assuming
guillotine.
the Von Frankenstein fortune.
Yeah, because yes,
exactly.
He played the long game.
Yeah, maybe this was a whole setup. He got him into the idea of reanimation and everything.
Knowing full well, smash the brain, or I'll get into a half-hearted fart. I'll get into a half-hearted fight now, which will damage the brain.
Yeah,
thus scuppering his plan. Yeah.
So we've saved the film there. We've talked ourselves into saving the film.
And that was The Curse of Frankenstein. So would we recommend it, guys? And what's our marks out of 5?
Oh, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think it's a respected landmark, but it's also, I found on this watching of it, surprisingly dreary.
Yes.
There's good set pieces, but the bits that aren't set pieces are quite dreary.
For me, it elevated Dracula AD 1972 because I was like, I enjoyed that way more than I enjoyed.
Yes. Yeah, that's strange, isn't it? What makes it a more enjoyable film when it's really compared? It's absolutely derided critically to Curse of Frankenstein.
But the plaudits we'll give it is you are exactly right to bring that up, and I hadn't considered that, but you're quite right. People wouldn't have seen in the 1950s. They wouldn't have had the exposure to the Universal one, and so as a retelling and as the first colour horror film, we've got to give it kind of kudos for that. But as you said, it is pretty dreary at the same time.
Yeah, but it's
and
dreary also. Yeah, it's dreary also compared to like a film like The Quatermass Experiment, which was Hammer's first, kind of genre film, which is a really brilliant film. This, I was surprised, because I've seen this film millions of times, and I've always kind of enjoyed it. But on this watching, I think like you, Ross, I was just like, oh, it's not as fun as Dracula AD 1972. And saying what fun is without the film actually just being like a silly piece of crap is quite difficult to quantify, isn't it?
Well, because I gave Dracula a 2,
yeah,
I'm going to have to give this a 1.5. It's a race to the bottom, unfortunately.
I'm gonna go for 3 because I thought lots of parts of it were less impressive than I remember. I was particularly disappointed with the score. The art direction is great. The cinematography is pretty good. The direction is okay, but I think the pacing of it is... It could probably be an hour long and be a lot better, but it's not really a feature film then, is it? No.
So, James, what would you give it then out of 5?
Well, I was also very pleased I didn't have to pay for it. Courtesy of Amazon Prime, it was free. So I think if I'd had to pay for it, I would have been even harsher on it. But it is, I will just go with a 1.
Oh, for a 1. Okay.
Wow,
yeah.
1 out of 5.
Sorry. Yeah.
What? That's 20% out of 100%. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow,
20%,
James.
Yeah.
Damned with faint praise.
Well, there you go. But what's even better is that I think I may even be able to score, as Ross said, a race to the bottom. One of the things we're looking at soon, even lower than this.
Yeah, I mean,
as we pivot to the world of literature in inverted commas.
Yeah, I think we might have to develop a minus scoring structure.
System. Possible, very possible.
Okay, right, so now we're doing something horrific, so where we talk about something which we've enjoyed since our last podcast, and we actually have had a previous podcast to this now. So I'm talking about something which isn't British, it's German. It's not particularly horror, however there are horrific scenes in it. People who get their heads caved in with rocks and things like that. I'm talking about a Netflix series called Dark.
It's very good.
Yeah, which I really enjoyed. It's only 3 seasons long. I think between 10 and 8 episodes per season. It's one of those things where you don't want to say too much about it to anyone you recommend it to. However, for me, it's kind of Lost meets The Killing. It's very much... it gets more and more depressing as you're watching it, and very dark and broody and...
just like you, Cleves.
And ominous and doom-laden, but don't let that put you off because it looks
a bit like you, Cleves.
Exactly. Yeah. Looks amazing. Again, looks at me. Looks amazing. The music is brilliant in it. Some excellent acting. So some of the actors in it, I'm so sad. I'm probably never going to see them in anything again. Because they're German and I don't watch a lot of...
They're not behind the Iron Curtain, Ross.
But I don't get to watch much German drama. But there's a guy who plays a character called Magnus, and I said to Beck, if I watched this and we had a son, I'd call him Magnus after that guy because he's just so cool. We finished watching it last week, and I've just been listening to all the music off it non-stop. And it's the first time
crying.
Yeah, I there's been when Lost ended, when Matt Smith
love Lost.
When Matt Smith left Doctor Who, and when
he loves Matt Smith.
I love Matt Smith, and when Dark ended, I've literally felt like someone's died in my life because I I have a loss to it. It's great. I really...
staying spoiler free entirely. It's a very satisfying ending, isn't it, Ross?
Yeah.
It's sometimes with TV they don't know how to wrap it up.
Yeah,
but with that, I was like,
point.
that's a good ending.
Yeah,
it's
incredibly confusing. Though. We spent most of our time going, "Who's that? How are they related to that person?" And I was just saying, I want this to. One of the reasons I wanted it to finish was so I could go and look it up on the internet to work out what the fuck happened in it. But highly recommend it. It's really good.
First series amazing. I thought the second series lost its way a little bit, but then the third series was amazing again.
Yeah, it's great. I just love it.
Great.
Recommend it. But watch it in German rather than the English dub, which is on.
Oh God, no!
Really?
Yeah. So on Netflix, you can swap it to German, and have it with subtitles. It's great. Watch it.
James, have you got a?
I haven't. I haven't seen anything new this week. But Ross quite rightfully recommended that. Said to me, I should flag up the BBC radio. It's a podcast series, but of course it was also on BBC. I think it was on Radio 4 or Radio 4 Extra, and basically it's the retelling of the H.P. Lovecraft stories, but how they've done it. Who is the man responsible for them, Ross? What's his name?
I can't remember. He's a Doctor Who writer, isn't he?
Yeah. So it's written by this guy Julian Simpson, who's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. And so it's a retelling of the Lovecraft stories, but then at the same time intertwining it with real life events and some kind of classic unsolved mysteries and things such as that.
Like the Rendlesham incident with the UFO thing.
Yes. Yeah, all of that. And in the latest series, the most recent pandemic, the recent pandemic.
Yeah.
Or the current pandemic, I should say.
What's it called,
they
James?
have all there has been Season 1 is Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Season 2 is Whisper in Darkness. And the final season, or the current final season, is The Shadow over in Innsmouth.
And they very much do it as if it's a podcast.
Yes.
It's like serial style, where
yes.
they're investigating this and you're getting it episode by episode, by different points of view. But they really play with the genre of it.
One of my favourite M.R. James stories is A Warning to the Curious, which you may be aware is the story of a man called Paxton, not Parkin, who basically digs up a crown and leads to a ghostly interference in his life, which leads to his demise. So I'm not talking about the story. I'm actually talking about a podcast to the curious, and they've done a 2-part episode where they kind of really, really forensically go over this story and bring about some really interesting kind of theories that this story, the subtext of this story is basically the First World War and a horror of the trenches. And they talk about the fact that potentially it's set in 1917. Once you reread it with that in mind, it really, really changes the whole complexion of the story. And I did find that fascinating, how a kind of just listening to someone else who probably knows a lot more about a subject than you do kind of riff on an idea of this kind of setting for the story. Once you reread the story in that way, it does really open up the story in a lot of really interesting avenues. And the rest of their podcast is brilliant as well. I think there's like 80 episodes or something now, and I would suggest that anyone with any kind of interest in any kind of horror fiction should listen to that, because it's a really, really good podcast. And the inspiration for this podcast in some ways, I like to think.
Yeah.
Hooray.
Although we have a completely different result.
This is quite different, yeah.
On the next episode, we will be covering, if you're playing along at home, Sapphire and Steel, Assignment 4, which the classic 1970s sort of horror, supernatural, sci-fi drama with Joanna Lumley and the guy from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. in.
David McCallum.
David McCallum.
Yeah.
It's only 4 episodes long. I believe it's on BritBox. I need to turn on my subscription.
I haven't got that.
However, it's also on YouTube, so you can watch it on YouTube illegally for free if it's still up there. Yeah, until next time, thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Get your friends to subscribe. Get your enemies to subscribe. Get anyone to subscribe. And
living or dead.
Living or dead, yes. And also...
Preferably dead, actually. That would be brilliant.
Follow us on Twitter, GeneralWitch1. And also, we've got a Patreon set up, and we are probably going to be putting some extra content on there. I've found the one of the episodes of the .2 podcast John and I did, which I'm going to put up there for patrons only. So that's the...
You're supposed to be enticing them to subscribe.
It's the only place you can find that on the internet.
You lucky people.
Lucky people. So if you've paid your £3 a month, you will get access to that exclusive episode. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Love, light, and peace.
Bye.
You have been listening to The General Witchfinders. Support the show and continue the conversation at patreon.com/General Witchfinders. Subscribe and spread the word at generalwitchfinders.com. Farewell, and don't have nightmares.